Now we turn to Daf Tes Amud Beis, Kashan Adodi. So once again, just to summarize from what we saw in Amud Aleph, there's a stira here in Rabbi Shimon as to whether or not a Kohen Mashiach is included in Karban Olav, just excluded from Tumas Mikdash v'Kodoshav, or he has the same status as Bezdin, and he's completely excluded and exempt from a Karban Olav. So Gemara resolves this. Amar Rav Huna Bereid Rabbi Yeshua Kasha. Kan bedalus, kan bedali dalus, Rabbi Akiva, for Rabbi Shimon, Savalek Rabbi Akiva, Chadu, Polagale, Bechad, Savalek Rabbi Akiva, Bedale, Dalus, De Potur, Upolagale, Bedalus. Fine. So let's explain. The Gemara is basically, in the name of Rav Huna, suggesting that Rabbi Shimon is a kind of an in-between sheet of Rabbi Akiva. He accepts Rabbi Akiva. So, for example, in the case of Dale Dalus, Rabbi Shimon is on board with Rabbi Akiva, and they both agree that the Kohen Mashiach is excluded. So that's called Dale Dalus. And with regard to Dale Dalus, a Kohen Mashiach has the same status as Bezdin, and he's completely excluded from Karban Olav Yoreh, which makes Rabbi Shimon common or in agreement with Rabbi Akiva. However, when we go up the line to Dalus, and we're no longer Dali Dalus, but Dalus and Ashir, in all these cases, according to Rabbi Shimon, he disagrees here with Rabbi Akiva, the Kohen Mashiach is included, with the exception of Tumas Migdash v'Kodashav. Now, the Gemara that we're about to learn, we're not up to it yet, I just want to finish here, but keep in mind the Gemara is about to analyze Rabbi Shimon's position with regard to Tumas Migdash v'Kodashav. Why is the Kohen Mashiach excluded from a Karban Olav Yored of Dalus or Ashirus in a case where he ruled and violated Tumas Migdash v'Kodashav inadvertently? But before we get to that derivation, let's just clarify the Shita of Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon basically says that a Kohen Mashiach Milchama is included in the Parsha and the Chiyuv of Karban Olav Yored. He is excluded only in the case of Dali Dalus. Okay, then. So again, just to summarize, the bottom line is Rabbi Shimon never accepted this principle of May. What was the pasuk that Rabbi Akiva quoted? To remind myself, sorry, of Me'achas, right? Yeah, Me'achas. So that drush of Me'achas of Rabbi Akiva, that it's an all or nothing, and since the Kohen Mashiach is excluded from Dali Dalus, therefore he's excluded from all cases of Karban Olav Yoreh, that's something that Rabbi Shimon never darshan, he never accepted that. And for one reason or another, as we'll soon see immediately in the next sugya, he excluded a Kohen Mashiach only from Tumas Migdash v'Kodashav, and Rabbi Shimon accepts Rabbi Akiva with regard to Dali Dalus. Weiter. El Shein Kohen Gadol Chayav. The Kohen Gadol, according to Rabbi Shimon in that mission, is not Chayav for Tumas Migdash v'Kodashav. He's excluded from Karban Olav Yored. And the Gemara wants to know why. What's the source for this Amar Chizkiah? My time in the Rabbi Shimon d'chsiv v'nichrasa nefesh hahi mitoch hakahol. So the Torah introduces the Karban Olav Yored as a shogeg for the chiyuv of v'nichrasa for one of those three violations, but the Torah adds the words mitoch hakahol. Okay, Now we're going to look at the status of the Koi Mashiach Milchama with regard to a classic Chatos. And we said that a Koi Mashiach brings a par, like Bezdin, as opposed to everyone else who has a choice of either a female goat or a female lamb, a kizba or a seira. And therefore, he is not included, this Kohen Mashiach, under Kol HaKol, under Mitoch HaKol. Misha Karban Shavel HaKol, who's included in the words Mitoch HaKol in the parsha of Tumas Mikdash V'Kadashav. That's only someone who has the same carbon for a violation of a chiv chatos as everybody else. So let's say, for example, a rank and file Jew would enter into the Mikdash B'Tumah inadvertently. Either he doesn't remember these Tameh, or he doesn't remember that a Tameh is not allowed to enter into the Mikdash, so he brings a carbon chatos of a seira or what? Or a kizba. But there's a unique carbon of a par in the case of a Kohen Mashiach who enters into the Mikdash Bitum. However, for some reason, which I'm not 100% sure why, the Gemara is now focused on the status of a Kohen Mashiach on Yom Kippur. Now watch what happens here. On Yom Kippur, there's going to be a special carbon. Well, let me start with basics. On Yom Kippur, the general carbon for Kaparas Yom Kippurim is the Soyer. But with regard to Kohanim, there's a separate carbon that's brought on Yom Kippur as a chatos to atone for the special, unique violations that are common, chas v'sholom, amongst the Kohanim. Instead of Seirim, there's a par. Now, who actually brings the par? It's the Kohen Gadol. That's called Paro Shel Kohen. But he brings the par on behalf of all the Achiv HaKohen, all the Shevet Kahun. So therefore, since the Torah excluded the Kohen, and in this case specifically Kohen Mashiach, from the carbon of Shnei Seirim of Yom Kippurim and the kapar of the Tzibur, and therefore the Kohen Mashiach, will have his kapar not through the Seirim but rather through the par. Therefore, he's not included on the Mitoch HaKol. And the halacha of carbon olav yored for the inadvertent violation of Tumas Mikdash Kadashav should be understood in light of the exclusion of a Kohen Mashuach from the Kapar Satzibra of the Seirim on Yom Kippur. That exclusion puts the Kohen Mashiach in a separate category, and then Afkabin is going to be Tumas Mikdash V'Kadashav, according to Rabbi Shimon. And now I think the Gemara here is referring to a standard Chatas Kavua, which instead of a Seira, a female goat, in the case of the Nasi is going to be a Sayer, a male goat. So he too is excluded from the Kohol. Not with regard to the Seirim of Yom Kippurim, but with regard to the Sayer of a Chatos on behalf of a Nasi who inadvertently violated a Chiv Kares. Whereas had he been a common person, not intending to insult anyone by using that term, he would bring a Seira, a female goat. So the Gemara says, you know what? Let's go back to Yom Kippur. I don't know why the Gemara makes everything depend upon Yom Kippur. In other words, whether you are considered Mitoch HaKol for a korban ol v'yori depends upon whether you're mitoch hakol on Yom Kippur. You could be excluded from the call with regard to any korban chatas for any transgression of the Torah. In the case of a nasi, he brings a sword instead of a seir, and yet he's still considered mitoch hakol. Why? Because Shaveh b'kapar d'Yom HaKippurim, the nasi is part of the call on Yom Kippur, and the Sa'ir, or in fact the Shnei Seirim, that are brought on Yom Kippur as a kapara for the tzibur include the nasi as well. The nasi is not excluded from the call. Whereas the Kohanim, and at the head of the pack is the Kohen Mashiach, they bring a par and are not included in the atonement of the Shnei Seirim. Im Kain, the Gemara is still not happy. Is Kohanim nami lo shavel kol b'kapara di Yom HaKippurim? Why do you limit yourself when you exclude from the words mitoch hakol the Kohen HaMashiach? Why not exclude all the Kohen? If your criterion, your determining factor is whether or not so-and-so is included in the kapar of the Seirim of Yom HaKippurim, well, none of the Kohanim are included. The par of the Kohen Gadol is brought on behalf of all the Kohanim. So they have the kaparas par rather than the kaparas seirim. So where answers Kohanim shavel kol b'shar mitzvahs l'shana kula. Every chatos includes every common Jew under the kizba or seira option as a kapara for a chet, so that even though the Kohanim have their own kapara and Yom Kippurim, but at least the whole year round they're included and integrated into the call for a kizba or a seira, for a classic transgression b'shogeg of a chiyuv karts. The Gemara is still not happy. Mashiach nami hashav b'shar mitzvahs hashana. Or if you're going to tell me that your criterion is Shar Mitzvahs Hashana, well, guess what? A Kohen Mashiach will also be included in the Chatos of a Seira or a Kizbah the whole year round. And therefore the Gemara rejects this explanation for Rabbi Shimon and Elam Rava Ema Hach. Here's what we have to say to explain Rabbi Shimon. Misha chatoso shovel yechid umay niu kol. So when the pasuk says mitoch hakol in the parsha of Tumas Migdash v'Kadashov, it includes mitoch hakol all the individuals whose chatos is shovel yechid. Now, there's a long footnote here. I tried to read it 3 times. I'll read it again. Rav explains that with regard to Tumas Migdash Gadosha mitoch hakol, does not refer to the kol as a whole, but rather to individuals of whom the kol is composed. Thus, it means that the offering for Tumas Migdash v'Kadoshav, that korban is brought by someone whose liability for sin is equal to that of the common Jew. Now, a common Jew incurs a chatos when he's over b'shogeg, and even if the majority of the kol would violate it, forget about an erroneous, ruling from the Bezdin, each and every individual brings a chatos. So therefore, mitoch hakol includes every single individual. This excludes the Kohen Mashiach because he incurs a chatos for only an oversight of a matter of law accompanied by an act of shogeg. Now I got it. The Kohen Mashiach is unique. This is Gemara back on Daf Zion, because his chiyuv chatos is conditional not just on shigas maisa, but on helim dover. So what he did, this Kohen Mashiach, is he paskined, he ruled for himself, and he forgot the law. And based on the fact that he forgot the law, he inadvertently violated the law. That's when he's chayav chatos. So with regard to the general chiyuv chatos, the Kohen Mashiach steps out of the kol, and therefore he's not considered mitoch hakol. Next, the Mishnah says, Rabbi Eliezer Omer Nosi Mevi Soir Omer Rabbi Yochanan Lo Omer Rabbi Eliezer Ela B'tumas Migdash V'Kadoshav. When does Rabbi Eliezer maintain that the Nosi will bring a Soir and not a carbon olav yored? He's excluded from carbon olav yored. That's only with regard to Tumas Migdash V'Kadoshav. And what's the logic that compels that? Hoil v'neba kares bo kibikvu. So the kares is mentioned in this violation of Tumas Migdash v'Kadoshav regarding all violations, all transgressions, all averos that generate a fixed chatos, a chatos kvua. Now, what's unique about the carbon olav yored? 2 out of 3 of them, of the violations, have no chiv kares. So the principle that applies to chatas kvua, namely it's a chiv kares b'meizid, is inapplicable to 2 out of 3 cases of carbon olav yored. For example, for a shvuas bitui or for a shama kol ola, they don't carry the kares penalty. Now, Tumas Migdash v'Kadoshav is the only one of the 3 that carries a chiyuv kares. Rabbi Eliezer therefore reasons as follows. Just as in the case of prohibitions that carry kares and a fixed chatos, the nasi is different, right? He brings a soyer as opposed to a seira. The nasi is also different with regard to Tumas Migdash v'Kadoshav in a carbon olav yored. Since in any event, the sin that he committed carries the penalty of kares, his carbon has to consist of a soyer. So in the cases of a shama kol ola or shvus bitui, since there's never a kares penalty, Rabbi Eliezer therefore concedes that the nasi is not subject to his special carbon chatos, namely a soy. So let me just see if I chop it. I think there's one punchline here. What we're doing is we're taking Tumas Migdash v'Kadoshav out of the bag of the 3 violations that generate a carbon olav yored. And why are we taking it out of the bag? Because it's a chiyuv kares. And that places it and categorizes it as a subcategory of all the chiyuvei kares, where the nasi is excluded from the classic carbon seira, and instead he brings a soyer. Just 1 second. So in the framework of carbon olav yored, the nasi is included when kares is not an issue, namely for shvuas bitui or v'shama kol ola. Well, forget about shama kol ola because a nasi can't testify. But in the case of Tumas Migdash v'Kadashav, where it incurs a chi of kares b'mezid, we're going to take that and we're going to paste it, cut and paste it, or clone it, if you will, onto the chi of kares of a regular chatos, where the nasi brings a soy. Omar of Papa Hachinam Mistaber, this is logic. The Isal Kedaik Rabbi Eliezer Akula Omar, right? If you're going to say that Rabbi Eliezer will be mechayev a sa'ir in the case of a nasi for all three, meaning even for v'shamakol. Well, leave out v'shamakol ola. Let's talk about the shvus bitu. Is michdi sa'ir nasi seir nasi upar mashiach b'makom yochid l'chatas koi. Right, both the nasi and the Mashiach and the Kohen Mashiach have a unique carbon in a classic case of a violation of Chiyuv Kares as a chatos. The Nasi will bring a male goat. The Mashiach will bring a par like the Bezdin. So therefore, it's not only the Nasi, but also the Kohen Mashiach who has been removed from the category of the Yachid. Nisni Nami Mashiach Mevi Par. So why doesn't Rabbi Eliezer tell us that in the case of a carbon olive yored for a Kohen Mashiach, he should bring a par, and we should place it into the category of a classic carbon chatos, b'shmias kol ubitui sfasayim, right? Because a Kohen could testify, so therefore he's included in shmias kol. Elamid lo katani Mashiach shmamina tumas migdash v'kadoshav koi to Mashiach pot. Gemara is not so happy with this. Amar le Rav Papa le Rav Nasan, de Rav Brei Rav Nasan Rav Papa. Mimai, how do you know this? Dilma Rabbi Eliezer Akula Koi. Really, Rabbi Eliezer in truth holds it in all these three violations for a carbon olive yored. When he says that the Nasi brings a soyer, then maybe he holds that in the case of Mashiach, Savalak Rabbi Kiva, that he's excluded entirely, the Yom Mashiach Patu Mikula. So Rabbi Eliezer holds that a Nasi brings a soyer in the case of carbon olive yored in Tumas Migdash v'Kadashav. And in that sense, he accepts Rabbi Shimon that in the case of a Kohen Mashiach, he be potter for Tumas Migdash v'Kadashav, as we spent a lot of time to figure out why, based on the pasuk Shaval of Mitoch HaKol. Now here Rashi adds another point, that Rabbi Eliezer's logic is that since a Kohen Mashiach cannot be included in the case of Tumas Migdash Kadasha, because Rabbi Eliezer accepted Rabbi Shimon, therefore the Kohen Mashiach Muhammad is excluded completely. So the Gemara says, wait a minute, how do you know? Maybe in a Kohen Mashiach he holds like Rabbi Akiva, the Om Mashiach Potu Mikula. Amalei, so Papa answers, Rabbi Kiva mi potole mi par. Rabbi Kiva only patters the Kohen Mashiach from a carbon oliviori, but not from a par. So if, as you argue, Rabbi Eliezer accepts Rabbi Kiva, then he should have mentioned that a Kohen Mashiach has to bring a par instead of a carbon oliviori. He didn't say that. So the implication is that Rabbi Eliezer holds that in the case of Tumas Migdash for Kadoshav, right? So the Nasi what? 1 second. So the Nasi brings a Sa'ir, but maybe he accepts Rabbi Shimon, who would say, like Rabbi Akiva, that because this is the part that Rabbi Shimon accepts Rabbi Akiva, that a Kohen Mashiach is completely excluded from Tumas Mikdash v'Kadosh. I mean, he doesn't bring a par; he brings nothing. And Vesulo Midi, meaning that's where we concluded. Rabbi Yochanan, let's just see if we can finish the perek. Modeh Rabbi Eliezer she'ein mevi osham tolu. Right, the Nasi does not have an osham tolu. Tani Tana Kamid Rav Sheshes osham tolu ba al Tumas Migdash v'Kadosh. I guess he doesn't know whether he's Tomei or not. Amalei, so Rav Sheshes objects, and he says the Amalach Mani. Right, you heard it, but who did you hear it from? Rabbi Eliezer, it's probably Rabbi Eliezer because the Omer he holds whole v'never bokaris kibbeh kfua. Right, so we're talking about kares, which applies to a classic violation of any chatos, of any chiyuv kares that generates a chatos kfua, is maisi nasi sarali. The nasi will bring a sayir, that's his chatos. The Omar Rabbi Yochanan, Moder Rabbi Eliezer she'ein mevi asham talui. How are you going to work this out? Because according to the statement of Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Eliezer agrees that a nasi doesn't bring an asham talui, even though he doesn't know whether he's Tomei and he entered into the Migdash. Kasha hadron alecha hora kohen Mashiach. So Bli Neder, tomorrow, I guess same time, unless there's a problem, we start the last perek of Horayos. Wish you a great day.